down and listen to records. Smell the cover, read all the verses. Tell me about your favorites on vinyl and vision.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of Vinyl and Vision. Here we are with episode 116. Today's very special guest is Jem Moloney. So Jem comes from Australia. He's the first guest that I have speaking to us from that country. He will be here soon with his band Dead to tour some of the U.S. They are making a stop at Caterwaul Fest in May, and dates are yet to be finalized, but they're going to be doing some dates here in the U.S. So I encourage you to visit the links that I will be providing to find out more information about Dead and We Empty Rooms, the label that he runs. That will lead you to tour dates as they become finalized, and obviously listen to and purchase some of the music that they make and that Jem releases on We Empty Rooms. Very cool stuff. So they have a new record out right now called Burn Us Clean, and they are one of those bands that can kind of do anything. So the album of discussion tonight is Harvey Milk's A Small Turn of Human Kindness. So that album, if you know it, is kind of disturbing. It's definitely dark. It's slow. It's dirgy. It's kind of doomy, and it's a great album. Harvey Milk, I've just learned about them now because of this show, but they are one of those bands that can kind of do anything. So between all of their records that they have out, they kind of span a gamut. And so Dead is very similar in that regard. And so if I can play you any music by Dead, you'll hear very different things. And so that's kind of why I'm trying to play you what I'm playing you. The last song, Nunchuck a Superfly, at the end of the episode is actually a song that Creston Spears of Harvey Milk performs on. And that's why I'm including it. Jem mentions it later on in the discussion, so you kind of hear how that comes to be. But I mean, it's interesting to speak to somebody about an album that's important to them, where they actually have been able to work with some of those people that are in that band. And Jem has had that opportunity, and so he does speak about it closer to the end of the episode. And it's pretty interesting stuff. I was really happy to have him on and learn about Dead and We Empty Rooms down in Australia, because it's always interesting to find out what's going on around the world, and to find out more about Harvey Milk. Pretty cool band, I gotta admit. So I have to make this quick, so I'm just going to say thank you very much, folks. All that we ask that you do for us is that you can please help us out by liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, rating, and reviewing. All of those things you do with the internet is what we normally say. And help if you want to help us out financially, just come and make a purchase from our website, psychicstatic.net, our Bandcamp page, which is also under the name Psychic Static. We have a new release coming out very soon from the band called Narnia, which is a punk band, which I have actually just joined. I am now a member of that band. Record release party is April 13th at the Parlor in Providence. I'd love to see you there. Please come down and please purchase a record. I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much, folks. Enjoy. Hi, Jem Moloney.
How about you? Yes, that's me. Yeah.
How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. We never use our last names because we never have visas.
You never have visas as in work visas?
Yeah.
Oh, and so you don't use your last names because you don't want them to find you?
Pretty much, yeah. Depending on the country, we always fall into this annoying kind of category where, like, we're not really eligible for the visas.
Right.
Because we're not doing, sort of enough work to actually pay for a visa, but at the same time, without one, they won't let you in. So
yeah. I mean, like,
the same thing happens with bands coming here. Yeah.
Right. I mean, what's the loophole for you? I mean, you just say that you're going off on holiday. Is that what happens?
You just do a bit of a mix of, obviously, you bring, like, when we come over this time, we just won't bring anything. And so obviously don't bring any merch or anything like that.
Yeah.
And we've always had like a kind of a letter from the studio that we're recording at, saying, that's what we're here to do.
Hmm.
It's just one of those things that as the years progress, all that stuff, used to be, easier to fly under the radar.
Right.
But it's sort of getting harder and harder. But it's just as bad for people coming here. It's just terrible. Like a band would be coming over at our level, and they are just tourists putting money into the economy. But it's this
Right.
outdated idea that, oh, you musicians, you must be making money. We want a piece of it. But it's over $1,000 per member just to, just for the right for them to work.
Right. Right.
But then
And
once they're here, they don't have to be paid at all. So it's like, what's the point of that?
right. Right. And it costs obviously to travel there. I mean, what is it? You've traveled to the US to tour on a few occasions now, right?
Yeah,
So what is that
it's
expense looking like to travel here?
yeah, that's something I'm looking at again today. It used to be a lot cheaper, I can tell you that. But ever since COVID, it's probably just for the two of us, it's probably like a good $5,000 or $6,000 or something once we,
Oh,
you know,
Jesus.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty tough times, I have to say.
Right.
I feel really lucky that we got to have the experiences in the past where it was more doable, but I also feel really sad because I just don't know, yeah, what that's going to mean for the sort of underground scene over the next few years.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. That is a difficult position to be in. I mean, there's something that I wanted to ask you anyway, considering we're kind of starting at this point. Um, what is your music scene like in Australia? Like you're currently in Melbourne? Or
Yeah, so I'm about an hour and a half out of Melbourne, and that's where I grew up playing. And I do feel really lucky that I grew up in that town because I guess, so I started playing in the really, really late 90s. But I started very young. I was in early high school. And I guess over the sort of next 10 years, I just watched the scene grow and grow and grow
Hmm.
until the point that, up until COVID, Melbourne was definitely, I mean, it still is, but it was a 7 night a week city where, if you're starting out, you can play every week for 2 or 3 years, and really kind of get your chops up.
Hmm.
In that way, I feel like it's really healthy, and we really noticed it when we, first came to the US and we realized, oh, okay, like, Austin, like being like hugely famous. Like
Sure.
Austin's not actually got as many shows going on as Melbourne.
Huh.
Melbourne, Australian cities aren't very good at selling, you know, itself. And
Yeah, I mean, like more kind of particularly the music scene in Melbourne. So you're saying every night of the week there's something happening in Melbourne.
oh, definitely. And for us, it definitely hit a point where maybe playing a Monday was a better option than a Friday or a Saturday because
Yeah.
you had less gigs to compete with, but still a lot of people going out, a lot of people, like, working in hospitality. So Monday was actually the night that they would go out anyway.
Right. Right.
Um, the flip side of that also is that I don't know if this is the cliche over there as well, but Australian music has really been based around pubs, like things like the legacy of bands like, AC/DC and, I'm just trying to think of a few others right now, the
In
Angels or
excess.
whatever. Yeah, even in excess, and they're all what people refer to as pub rock bands.
Hmm.
And the sad thing about that is, yeah, it's great that it gives you somewhere to play, but it's completely intertwined, completely reliant on, and so caught up in the alcohol industry.
Oh yeah.
So they're not music venues per se, they are alcohol retailers that
Yeah.
traditionally relied on music,
To get
for
people
their
in the door.
crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I mean,
I've
it's
lived through the period of that changing, is in the sense that people are drinking less,
oh, okay.
alcohol costs so much more. It's just not as viable a business. And I've always played in bands where, where we've had nights where the publican has gone, it's sold out, but that was a complete waste of time for us because no one was drinking.
So you can get paid? Is that what the deal is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you wouldn't get paid.
So
And
the music industry is reliant on drink sales to get paid in
uh,
Australia.
ab- absolutely, yeah. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
I'm not saying that venues don't do door deals, they do, but I just mean on the whole, like, anyway, I guess all I meant as far as the scene is what I really noticed when we first came to the US was, so our drinking age is 18. That means that all ages shows are much harder in a way to kind of make viable, because what sort of happens is kids in high school, they might like music, but
Mhm.
they're still kids and they're a bit shy, and they're not necessarily, there aren't that many high school kids that are organized enough to you know book a venue.
Sure.
And then the day they finish school, they they can legally go out and drink, so they don't really give a fuck anymore about trying to support an all ages scene. They just go to the pub, you know.
Right. Sure. Huh.
And I always really struggled with that because I see it as, particularly in this day and age where accessibility and inclusivity, they're almost buzzwords, but we still exclude kids from coming to shows
Hmm.
for no good reason except for the fact that the whole thing's based around drinking.
Right.
So when we came to the States, what we really noticed, which was great, was okay, because of that extra few years, the drinking age being 21, all ages shows are much, much more common, and they're healthier, and
Hmm.
um, yeah, there's just more. I think in Melbourne, you know, blessing and a curse, so many venues, so many places to play, but because they were all licensed venues, it meant that that's what our scene was based around. So
Yeah.
you've
Weird.
got bands going, you've got to fit whatever you do, you've got to fit it into this slot, because we're here to drink. Whereas if
Mhm.
you're playing in a DIY venue, you can be a band that says, no, our set's only 10 minutes. And the venue will go, cool. we don't care. do what you want. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. But so I mean, I would love to get into that more in depth just because it's kind of interesting to me. I'm not in promotions really. I'm not into like, booking shows, but I mean, I've been dealing with it for years as well. It sounds interesting because it sounds like so similar, but it sounds like it's a little different too. So, but even more so than that, I mean, like I'm just kind of curious what the music scene looks like because you yourself, you're in a band called Dead, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And you run a label called We Empty Rooms,
That's
which
it. Yeah.
primarily focuses on you know, experimental kind of strange noise rock-ish stuff. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say, you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, that is fair.
So
Yeah.
what do you think of the music scene as far as like, the bands that are around and the genres that are popular right now in Australia?
Um, I think that what I've observed, at all times, so I'm 38 now, and I started playing in pubs when I was 13. So I already feel like an old man, and maybe I feel like an old man earlier because I've been doing it
Yeah.
for, what is that, 25 years or something.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't want to sort of say things like, oh, it's not like it used to be, because things will never be like it used to be. That's fine.
Sure.
But I think one thing that I've observed as a growing trend is just a shift from bands being more themselves and more kind of, a bit unique and a bit, the genres seem to get more and more defined, and the subgenres.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I remember sort of thinking, I like metal. I like this thing called heavy metal. This is cool.
Hmm.
And that sort of meant to me, that sort of meant everything like that was sort of aggressive and heavy. So that was Motorhead, and that was Deep Purple, and that was, you know, Megadeth, or whatever I could get my hands on, suicidal tendencies.
Hmm.
And then now it's like the pigeonholes get smaller and smaller and smaller, and bands seem to be more likely to be just a little bit more chiseled into a specific, it's
Sure.
like there's an idea of what we're going to be before we've even put it out there. And
Hmm.
I just think a lot of that comes from the fact that, you can go on YouTube, you can literally see pretty much whatever you want to see. You can see what is a Swedish, black metal band look and sound like, what gear are they using, and you can just kind of
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
grab that. Whereas, I mean, I often use this as an example. The first time I toured New Zealand, I really noticed, the bands here are not necessarily as proficient, like chops wise,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
but they're way more unique because these towns are so small that
Huh.
that's just the band. That's just three people that get along with each other just playing. And,
Right.
happens to be that clearly the drummer is more into metal than the rest of them, or, whatever. But
Yeah.
the end product ends up being,
Being that
almost
band.
by default, just being more unique.
Yeah.
So I've found that, yeah, in general, I don't like to sort of be down on my own country or anything, but in general, yeah, it's pretty. Everything's kind of within its niche, and I feel like audiences also are more. They struggle with bands like us that are a bit all over the place.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, with that being said, like some of the names that came to my mind, being from Australia were Tropical Fuckstorm, King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, and Emil and the Sniffers. Like those are the big names that are kind of right now that are, circling the punk and the noise rock realm. So I
Yeah.
mean, like how does that fare? Like, I mean, are you connected to those types of bands, or are you even consider yourself in the same, genre as them?
It's funny. So the drummer from Tropical Fuckstorm is literally around the corner from me.
Oh yeah.
Um, and actually, we record a lot of our albums with their recording engineer as well. So I have known them for a very long time, all the people in that band.
Hmm.
And I would say a few things. So the first is that they were in a band called the Drones, who were a really big deal in Australia.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, they didn't seem to like make an impact in the US. And that seems to be almost a strange phenomena that happens here often, which is like if a band gets big in Australia, it's very hard for them to then go over to the US and kind of repeat it, like
Yeah.
I think it's partly because like it's becomes really expensive for them to do it, because if they get big here, they sort of have a sort of production cost, and then to take that to a new place that couldn't care less. Anyway, so I've gone off the topic, but I think Tropical Fuckstorm are probably one of the few that, to me, they really buck the trend. Um,
They're
they
doing really
sound
well.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, they sound like they're doing their own thing. I think they've done a rare, like the fact that they already had a big band that were a big deal, that were winning awards and all that
Hmm.
sort of stuff, and then ended that band, which usually, yeah, that's a fucking terrible idea career wise. Like you think how many bands do that and
Right.
then start a new one. Like,
Well, that wasn't their
but
choice. I mean, they lost a primary member, right?
I believe they stopped playing as the Drones pretty much before
Oh,
Mike
okay.
passed away.
All right. Yeah,
Um,
I'm not too familiar
yeah,
with their history, but yeah, I assumed it had to do with tragedy.
and Mike was sort of not. Yeah, not, I mean, Mike was a really beautiful man and a great drummer. He played in one of my favorite bands, Legends of Motorsport. But he wasn't an original Drones member. Um, anyway, they have managed to repeat that success, and they really just do their own thing, and I applaud them for it. They seem to be the exception, whereas every other time someone
Hmm.
from overseas, like every other Australian band that seems to be doing well, is like you mentioned, Amel and the Sniffers, Gizzard Wizard, or they're all very niche bands that are kind of, they have a
Yeah.
very they have a sound that you can recognize straight
Sure.
away,
Sure.
and you know that they're not going to surprise you. You know,
Hmm.
whereas with Tropical Fuckstorm, what I do love and respect about them is, anything could happen. I don't necessarily love
Okay.
it. Like they did a cover of 1983, the Hendrix song.
Yes, I heard that. Yeah.
I don't think it's as good because I think that song to me is almost one of the most perfect
True.
recorded songs of all time. Like it's
Yeah.
but Jesus, you know, what a that takes some nerve. So good on him. Like that's a
Yeah, no, I actually
yeah.
I own that record, and I think I actually really did like that cover. And I don't typically like covers. I mean, typically I'm just
Yeah.
like, why bother? It's just especially something like that. It's so unique and so like masterful, I mean, it's Jimi Hendrix, for the love of God. Um, but they did such a good job with it, and they did it like as authentically as they could, I think. I think they really tried to be true to the original, as opposed to say, look, well, let's make this our own now. Like, we're this weird band anyway. Let's just do whatever
Yeah,
we want
yeah.
with it. Which kind of highlights how talented they are, really, because I mean, I've been loving their music anyway, and then like hearing an album full of covers, I was just like, wow, like they're good at just doing whatever. It doesn't even matter. Like they can do anything
Yeah.
great.
I really respect that. And again, I think partly what separates them too is they are, you sort of got Fee and Gaz, they've played together for a very, very long time, and they're the ones that are from the Drones.
Hmm.
But even the two of them musically, I would say, are quite different. And then Hammer, the drummer, I mean, she's played in a lot of different bands, usually kind of more, at least the ones that I've seen, usually at the heavier end of the scale, like a bit more brutish.
Yeah.
Um, and then Erica, the other guitarist, she's got a lot of different bands, and they're so all I'm saying is they're not like that. They're a real mismatched band, and that's probably, I think that's the strength. That
Yeah.
they're not all people agreeing with each other. They're
Right.
people sort of just letting each other do their own thing.
And like from different backgrounds, different influences. So they
Yeah.
all bring something different to the table. Which is kind of what I want to talk to you about. I feel like we've been talking about them for so much for so long now.
Yeah.
Um, but you, I mean, so your band Dead, I was saying how, it's kind of, I mean, it's not, I say noise rock in the idea that it's kind of like this over-encompassing label, because using someone like Tropical Fuckstorm as an example, it's just like they fall into that category, even though they are not, they don't sound at all like no, like noise rock bands that I know and like. I mean, compared to Jesus Lizard, Big Black, anything like that, it's just like they're not the same. They're not the same thing at all.
No, but it maybe the joining factor is, I think you would probably find if you asked us, or if you asked Tropical Fuckstorm, or any other band that maybe is sort of in noise rock but also not. If you asked any of them, hey, what do you think of the Jesus Lizard?
Hmm.
Everyone unanimously would say, well, they're fucking great. So it's like it's music made by people who do love and respect
Yeah,
those bands. Doesn't
right.
mean, I mean, the Jesus Lizard is, I know it's such a over overly talked about band, but that's because they're great. But the Jesus Lizard to me, maybe to an Australian they're slightly less surprising because we already had the Birthday Party, which is
Oh, that's right.
pretty obviously the kind of predecessor.
Yes.
Um,
Right.
and the Jesus Lizard to me sound like a band who clearly love the Birthday
Yeah,
Party,
that's
but have
true.
gone but have gone to the next. They're not stuck in the past.
Sure.
They're doing their own thing.
Yeah. They're the
Look,
American equivalent, I guess you could say.
yeah, they've sort of they've gone, shit, something in that really works.
Hmm.
And then they've done it their own way. And, you know, I think a band like the Jesus Lizard are a good example of, they're not trying to be, in fact, if I would critique them at all, I would say a lot of their songs kind of sound the same. Like they're not worried about trying to cover all this ground.
Right.
They just sound like them,
Yeah.
like that is, I feel like when you hear Dwayne Dennison play guitar, you get a pretty good idea of what he would be like as a human to hang out with. You
Yeah.
know,
Okay.
I
Sure.
don't feel like he's putting anything on.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what would you say about Dead? Because from what I know and what I've heard so far, I have not been able to listen to your entire discography because there's just way too much there.
Yeah.
But it's you and your friend and label mate Jace, right?
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
just a two piece,
Yep.
and it has
Yeah.
been right along ever since the beginning.
Yeah. So we are a two piece in the sense that we're the two members of the band, but we have always been along the way. We've collaborated a little bit, and in fact, we just started making an album with a third member who, is I played with him in high school, uh, and he sort of has every now and then done something with Dead, and we always said to him, "Hey, basically, you've always got a home in this band when you want it," but
Hmm.
he kind of never. For a long time, he never lived anywhere near us, and he was overseas and whatever. But essentially, yeah, it is the two of us. But I suppose in the way, I'm trying to think of an example, in the sense that we're the people driving the band. And the reason that it became the two of us, I mean, prior to Dead, we were in a three-piece, and Jace was on guitar. And that band, and like so many bands, just, we couldn't move at the pace that me and Jace wanted to, because it's hard to convince more than two people to lose a lot of money, sleep on a lot of floors, get
Right.
abused.
Right.
You're asking a lot of people. So we then said, all right, we'll start doing something as the two of us, but we never said, and we want it to be a two piece. It was always open to other people being involved. But the reality is, like I said, at our level, it's hard because we can't say to someone, hey, come and play with us for a while and we will pay
Sure.
you this wage.
Right. Which would be
Um,
nothing.
yeah. So, yeah. So, long
Because
story short, we collaborate as well.
yeah.
And we've done a few albums with third members, and we'll continue to do that. But we'll continue to, when we come to the US, it'll be just the two of us. And yeah, we'll kind of just always, basically until one of us dies, just keep doing that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay. Um, but I mean, so it's a level of commitment thing. Nobody's willing to commit the same way that you and Chase do.
Yeah, but that's true. But also, there's a lot to be said for, um, like I've heard some people say, bands, let's say we would talk about three, four, five-piece bands. I've heard a lot of people say like they basically need a leader.
Hmm.
Um, and I have played in bands with, six members that were painfully democratic. I've played in three pieces that were totally democratic. And it is true that it's slower going. And I think it's
Sure.
just as you get older, it's harder to organize three people who are adults with adult commitments.
Oh yeah.
Hey, when can you do this? And but what I think people often gloss over is, like, making music is a pretty intimate thing, and there's a lot of communication, and the communication that you can have between two people as you're playing is far different to any other version. As soon as you've got three, the difference between three and four isn't crazy, and four and five is even less so. But
Hmm.
two brings all these changes. Like, I don't have to think about what key Jace is in. I don't have to worry about when he changes the key.
Right.
We can play completely out of time and still make sense. We can,
Hmm.
slow things down, speed things up. Like, there's a lot that only exists as a two piece. And in a way, I would say it's sort of no different to like this conversation or any conversation right now.
Sure. You can
There's,
go in
there's
any
a there's a
direction you want.
level, yeah, there's a level of intimacy that you can kind of, at least I think, only achieve with two. I mean, I know people have, you know, three-person intimate relationships and stuff, and
Sure, but that gets
good for them.
messy.
But
Gets
it's harder to
complicated.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. I actually haven't even thought about it that way, but you're absolutely correct. Because yeah, even the idea of speaking, I mean, like it's just so much easier when it's two people. Like, like having these conversations and having a third person involved. Like if there was like, let's just say Jace was involved in this conversation, it would all of a sudden become so much more complicated to just kind of manage and
Yeah.
kind of give everyone their kind of space and time to speak and to say whatever they needed to say. So I
There's
understand
also
that.
Yeah, and there's also an element, like if you sort of think of it like the Venn diagram model, you've got two people and how they can play music together,
Hmm.
and you bring that Venn diagram together, then that big bit in the middle, that's the band, you know. So there might be little bits of each of us that don't particularly come into Dead, although I would say with Jason and I, we pretty much bring every element of ourselves
You're
to the
both
band.
you're both whole circles that make dead.
Yeah, pretty much. There's, you know, he did like some solo stuff a while back, and I could sort of tell. I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely hitting something that you wouldn't hit if you had me playing with you. But as soon as
Hmm.
you bring three, that crossover bit becomes much smaller
Right.
because you just, you know, and if you're, it's not a bad thing either, and it's probably
Sure.
why a band like the Jesus Lizard are so successful, because they have a sound and people can kind of rely on that sound, and people lock into their kind of positions
Sure.
and they do it really well. So there's, it's not that one's better than the other, but
It's limiting.
yeah. And so for us, the limit obviously is the physical limits. It's more that, but I've always enjoyed the challenge of that. I've always enjoyed, for me, I would prefer to say, yeah, this song would be really cool with a third member playing a harmony,
Right.
but but I don't mind it not being there when we play live, because I think the um, you know, the other side of it is that there's an intensity to the two of us playing
Sure.
that is very, very hard to get with once you throw anyone else in there.
Hmm. It makes sense. I mean, I think the two piece is on the rise. I think more and more people are doing two-piece bands, it seems for me. I mean, I can think of like 3 or 4 bands that I've spoken with just recently that are two-piece bands, you know? Um,
I think it's a reflection of the times in a way, like
yeah,
just people having less time, and it's
sure.
harder to schedule things, and yeah,
But plus
uh,
you also get that immediacy because you only have to bounce an idea off one person. There's no, there's no group text with like multiple people being like, "Hey, are you free tonight?" Okay, no, you're not free tonight. What about tomorrow? Okay, and then that I gotta check with them and then
yeah,
the same thing. And then the same thing with making the music. It's like, well, how do you feel about that piece? Do you like that piece? No, you don't like that? Okay, well, he does, she doesn't. I don't know. It's just so much more complicated. It's just, it takes up too much time. It's can be frustrating. All those things.
yeah, and not, you know, it shouldn't be overlooked that at least down here, I think it's similar in the States though. You go back 20 years, like, or even longer, when I was first playing, I was never paid better. I've never been paid better than I was back then when I was a
Sure.
kid.
Yeah.
So even though we were not very good, and
Yeah.
we were all, you know, it was our first band and all of that, we were, you know, making $400 or $500 a week
Hmm.
from playing music.
Not bad.
And fast forward to, you know, just before the pandemic, and Dead, with a much more of a following and much, you know, bringing a lot more to the table, we'd be lucky to be getting, you know, $50 or $60, you
A
know, and
gig
that's,
or a
yeah,
week.
and that's, well, yeah, sorry, from a show, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's, you know, and that's 20 years later. So
Hmm.
you can't, that's, so all I'm getting at is that, you know, that first band that I was in, I mean, we went and made an album, and it was the most I've ever spent on an album in my life, again, because we had the money. Like, we were just investing the money
Right.
that we had made from shows into the band, and that's what you do. And so it's
Yeah.
easier to do that when there's a bit more money, and you can say, hey, can you guys commit to every Thursday night?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so I suppose I can, because we're generating some income
Sure, sure.
You know?
And your
Yeah.
kids, you have completely untethered. You're out of
Yeah.
control, wild men, probably. I know I was. I don't know about you. Uh, but
I also think it's like as you see it happen more and like we have had, and it's it's hard to know how to react to this. I always try and just be really grateful and show them that that means a lot to me. But we're now old enough that I've had several people come up to me and say, "Yeah, we formed a two piece because we saw you play,"
oh,
and
that's great.
and then they'll tell me, yeah, I was 14, and what they mean is we didn't know that you could do it. Like, so we were sort of there in this town going, it sucks, this,
Right.
I wish we could be in a band. And then we saw you play and we went, oh, you can do that. Like it's,
Yeah. Wow. So
so I think
you guys are the originators of the two piece in Australia,
Oh no, no,
huh?
not at all. But not by any stretch. But I can say that when we started, it's changed a lot. Like when we started, it was definitely people's main reference seemed to be like Lightning Bolt and
hmm
Om. Om were kind of new at the time.
Oh,
Um,
I have one of their
and
CDs right now.
yeah, they're a great band. Because
Heavy.
everyone else sort of thought, oh yeah. Usually when you said two piece, people thought of like the White Stripes or the Black Keys or
Sure. I
um,
mean that
and
qualifies as well. Sure.
yeah, but I suppose people hadn't thought of it as at the more kind of you know big sound kind
Yeah.
of. So no, I wouldn't say that we're originators, but definitely. And in fact, I was in two drum and bass two piece bands before Dead anyway.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, but it's definitely I think the more it happens, the more people see it and they go, oh, okay, that's what you can do. And but I think what we did bring that has been I guess a point of difference is just that we did not, and I was very like deliberate about this. It's maybe the only thing actually, because the thing with Dead is there aren't really any rules, but I did kind of steer it from the beginning away from effects pedals and loops and having
hmm
3 amps and all that, all those sort of things that two piece bands seem to be doing to kind of, in a way, compensate for
Sure.
the lack of
Right.
members.
Yep.
Our approach was it was almost just like, well, if everyone's doing that, let's do the opposite. And that's what'll be, what's different about us is um, there are no loops, there are no crazy delays, or it's just that it's way more. I find it way more intimidating to listen to a band where I can hear all the mistakes and I can hear the gaps and I can like
Sure.
I love that stuff. Yeah,
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if I picked up on that in your recordings. I definitely listened to a good portion of it. Starting actually at the very beginning. I think I actually went to the beginning of your Bandcamp page and would just listen to the first recording to just kind of get an idea because I was just like, I know I'm gonna, skip some of this stuff because there's just no way I'm gonna get through all of it. But
yeah,
I think I started there and I was just like, okay, interesting kind of I don't even know if I could speak to it very well now because I've just been so swamped. My brain is just now, kind of like over full with all this dead material.
yeah,
Um, because it was also compelling that it seems like you guys always work with like a concept. Like there's something that you're always kind of challenging yourself. Like if you think about the new record that you put out or you're putting out, Burn Us Clean, correct?
yeah, yeah,
Um, I saw it on Bandcamp and I was just like, what is this? I don't get what this is, what's going on here. And then I was looking at it more closely. I was just like, oh, okay, so you're releasing a full-length record, but as the physical copy of it, as the physical, you know, whatever you want to call that, the physical media, you're releasing it as a box set of 9 individual split singles
yeah.
with friends, bands, or label mates being the B-side to each single, which is basically a song on the record.
Yes, yeah.
That's insane.
It
Where
is.
did you get this idea?
Well, that just reminded me of something that I feel is important to kind of acknowledge,
Sure,
which is,
please.
you mentioned like the noise rock thing, and I always feel like I don't honestly with genres, I don't care. Like if it helps someone, we always have to categorize things in our brain. So I sort of,
Right.
I can think of bands as being like, oh, they're the Minneapolis bands, or they're, like you sort of, it helps you sort of compartmentalize them.
Sure.
So if the noise rock community um, will have us, then we're happy to be there.
Okay.
But we have no interest in you know like fitting in or playing by the rules.
Right.
But it just reminded me that I think most of us at some point are joined by Conan Neutron, and that's how I came to um, know this podcast and many others. To be fair, I just wanted to give that shout out to him. But
Sure.
one thing that kept me going when I started this project was my knowledge that he had done something even more ridiculous, because he did a series of 12. And
Oh, really?
okay, Conan can do 12. That means any normal human being can probably do 6 or 7. So I'll shoot for 9, and I'll get there.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
but the way those things come about is, for starters, if you go back to that first album is literally us. I mean, we formed the band. We just knew that we wanted to keep hanging out together. We'd
Hmm.
never played together in that configuration. I'd never seen Jace play bass. I didn't even necessarily understand that he could. I didn't really realize that, because I knew him more as a guitarist. And I booked our first tour before we'd written a song. So I just, and that was like 14, 15 dates. Just me
Yeah.
ringing people up saying, it's Jem, we've got a new band, can we book a show? And no one ever said, can I hear a demo?
Huh.
So
Okay.
we did that, and we just wrote some stuff and went out and played it. And then that album is us just, going, okay, let's record the songs that we have.
Yeah.
And then album 2 is kind of the same, which is let's go and record some new songs that we have. And then album 3 is probably the same. And then once we did that, I realized, okay, this is going to be a pretty productive band, because, Jace moves very fast. He writes a lot of music, and he just, he
Hmm.
kind of never looks in the rear vision mirror. He just keeps going.
Right.
So I sort of started to realize, I thought about bands, like that I respect, that have put out a lot, like Melvins and Boris or something, bands that have that high output.
Sure.
And I thought, it helps with those bands when as they go along, when they do something that's got a bit of a focus, rather than let's just keep recording whatever material we happen to have. you know, I noticed it's cool when those bands start to go, okay, we've done, that massive doomy album, so we don't need to do that again. So what are we going to do that's different?
Yeah.
So that's when the idea of we started to become a little bit more, okay, these songs are going to go together. And so now it might be that a song might exist for 6, 7, 8 years before it gets recorded, because it sort of doesn't, quite fit the album yet.
Okay.
And that's just along the way become more and more, deliberate. So yeah, this came about because I apologize for my vagueness, but one of the problems with the two of us is we just have a bit of a policy of moving it forward, and whoever is doing whatever at the time, we just back them. So,
Hmm.
if Jace does the cover, like the drawing that's going to be the cover of the new album, I don't really say, no, that's no good, do it again. If he's like, if he believes it, I just, back him. And
Sure.
similarly with, if I sort of say to him, this album, like Raving Drooling was the metal album, he just kind of goes, yeah, okay. And the other thing with the two piece is you can agree with each other and still kind of ignore each other.
Sure.
You can go, yeah, cool, whatever. I'm still just going to do what I want. But the pop album came about because we have always loved good melody and songwriting. We always
Yeah.
have, and it's always been in there with our band, but maybe not as obvious as when, you know, there's a guitar there just to play that melody. And it's probably also at the you know, when you play heavy, you know, you crush some of that melody. So that's the kind of
Sure.
the, you know, the trade-off. So
Yeah.
yeah, the pop album was just us going, look, we know we love pop. We know that we actually can hear the melody in our own songs. Why don't we just do a whole album that is only pop songs? So not two or three on the album, but then there's still that 10-minute kind of epic song or whatever that we tend to, you know,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
end up having. We're like, let's just and then as we went along, where I said, oh, what would be really cool is if they were all singles, but it was also an album. Like, is in, I want it to work. That's the challenge. I want it to work in both formats. I want it to work when you listen from start to finish. You go, yeah, that's an album.
Yeah.
I believe that. But I also want them to exist on their own, because that was us sort of going, let's not be grumpy old men about the fact that kids these days don't listen to albums as much. Let's just kind of, you know, embrace that.
But now you're also having to, you run a label and you're putting out albums, you're putting out vinyl records, not only
Yeah.
from your own band, but from other bands. Not so you're not just pressing one 12-inch record, you're pressing nine 7-inch records. And so
Yeah.
obviously, and they and to a quantity. I mean, they're not massive quantities, but I mean, like what, 100 copies per single, I guess, something around that.
So we did
Um,
200 of each. Yeah.
200 of each. That's
Yeah.
a lot. 200 times
It
nine.
is.
That's
Yeah.
1,800 records.
It was terrifying when I went to pick them up. I just was like, oh. And what softened the blow was when I went to the pressing plant to pick them up. There was this kid who turned out to be from the town I live in, you know, because the pressing plant is in Melbourne.
Mhm.
And he had turned up to pick up his records just on his skateboard. He didn't realize that, like,
Small run, I hope.
well, I think it was 150 or 200 LPs. You know, it's a big, heavy box.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it is.
I said to him, "Hey, do you want to lift?" You know, he was like, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." And I sort of, yeah, I sort of felt like, oh, I remember being you. You know,
Right.
I probably would have done the same thing. And now here I am. I'm just you 25 years later. Like, you know, you just have to kind of up the ante. Like, what's the next sort of challenge?
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
but
The
yeah,
next.
then filing all the boxes under the bed before my girlfriend came home, just being like, oh god, I really hope these sell. I really hope these sell.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so
Yeah.
you're putting them together as a box set, but then you're also selling them individually, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Insane. I give you seriously, no, I mean, I give you a lot of credit. I mean, it's ambitious. It's ambitious, and it's like, obviously you guys focus a lot on artwork. You do all of your own screen printing. So these are
Yeah.
very unique. They're all these individualized silk screened jackets. So I mean, it's pretty impressive. I definitely admire it a lot. So regardless of whether or not they sell, or at least at what time frame, obviously you want them to sell out like that, but whatever. I mean, it'll be what it'll be. It's just such a cool idea, and I'm happy to see that you're doing it.
Yeah. And look, the challenge for us is that if we didn't release as much music as we did, I wouldn't have to concern myself so much with quantities.
Hmm.
But the problem is, because we keep releasing new material, every time you release a new album, that drastically, the sales of everything prior to it just drop.
Hmm.
Because most people, you know, most people at the merch desk at a show just say, what's the most recent album.
Sure.
Uh, so, I've always found it hard to just tread that line. I don't want to have records, sitting in storage. I don't, and because we do a lot of handmade stuff, I don't want to make any more than we have to, but I
Sure.
also don't want to, like, I have no interest in like manufacturing scarcity, like sort of. Um, so it's hard because every now and then someone sort of gets in touch and basically wants to buy all the old stuff, and I kind of go, I
There's
don't
no
really
more
have
of
any
those.
copies of that, but at the same time, it's like, dead is like a train. It's just like just jump on wherever you can.
Yeah.
Everything else is still there on Bandcamp, so it's not like you can't listen to it. You can download it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you can,
But they
and
want the physical copy, which is nice. I mean, it's nice to know that fans at least want to be able to have like a physical copy, whether they came in too late or not is it's whatever. It is what it is. I mean, you could probably check eBay or Discogs or something, if if they
yeah,
really want it. Yeah, you obviously want them to go through you, but whatever. There's only so much you can do. Um, but I want to speak more about kind of your band and you personally. You're mentioning how your band Dead tackles different genres, and I respect that as well. But so we're here tonight to speak about a record that was important to you, and your choice was in that same vein. You chose Harvey Milk's "Small Turn of Human Kindness." And Harvey Milk is one of those bands, it seems, because I didn't know them prior to you choosing this record and me diving in and doing all the
yeah,
research. But they are very much similarly a band that just does whatever the fuck they want to do, it seems.
mm,
Or we're a
yeah,
band, I guess. I guess it's not.
yeah.
I guess they have officially broken up. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say.
It is hard to say, but it seems unlikely that they would create more music, at least at this point in time. Yeah,
Right, right. So
yeah,
Creston Spears is the kind of head honcho of Harvey Milk. He's known as the main songwriter, I guess, of that band. And he has gone on to release a lot of his own solo work. He has his own Patreon page, which is just all his own work, and obviously through a monthly subscription basis. And you actually got to work with him. You actually released two of his records.
yeah. I
So
did, which is sort of hard to. It seems not real when I say that out aloud, but yes,
yeah,
that's
for a bit for someone being
yeah,
obviously very important to you and you're influential to you, a major influence, right? So um I have to say two things before we kind of get into this is that um very, very hard to do research on this record. I don't know if you're familiar with that or have tried it yourself. There's
I
obviously
can probably fill
reviews.
you in a little bit,
Well,
like as we go along.
that's what
Yeah.
I was gonna ask because I was just like, you seem like you're gonna be the best the best resource I'm gonna have because there's a lot of reviews. If you look up Harvey Milk's A Small Turn of Human Kindness, you'll find reviews, endless number of reviews from endless publications that ostensibly say the same thing over and over. I mean,
Mm,
it's a difficult album. It's very heavy. It's very loud, but it's very slow. It's very dirgy. Um, and some people seem to be very fascinated by that. Um, I'm kind of fascinated by the element that of like this slow, dirgy music, and I noticed that Dead had dabbled in that as well. You guys kind of sometimes do some songs that are similar in this, similar vein, right?
yeah.
So I'm curious, um, like when you're doing something like that, because obviously you can do pop music, you can do noise rock, you can do whatever you want. When you're tackling something like slow, heavy, dirgy music. Is there anything that you need to do to get into that mindset?
Well, the slow, heavy thing is my natural state.
Oh yeah?
So when I first met Jace and we started playing together, that was the first time for me I really had to tackle music that wasn't in that vein.
Oh, okay.
Um, and so there's a generation gap between us. He's 12 years older than me.
Oh, okay.
So when we started playing together, we had very different, you know, kind of histories. We had very different music that had influenced us.
Hmm.
And he grew up more in an era when things like post-punk were really current and, pushing the envelope, I guess. And
Hmm.
things like, Zeppelin and Floyd and Deep Purple and all that was kind of, a bit
Or
daggy
yeah,
and uncool. And I had a
dinosaur
really,
rock.
yeah, I had a really different version of all that because I became obsessed with music at 5 years old and I couldn't get enough of it. And I had
Hmm.
an older brother, 6 years older, and he sort of he helped kind of he gave me the little push,
Yeah. Okay.
and I just couldn't get enough of it. And uh, but when you're that young, you have no concept of what is and isn't cool. And in fact, being that into music amongst my peers already made me uncool to like not
Right.
uncool, but just it was awkward
You
because
were misunderstood or not understood at all.
yeah. And so to me, I didn't care if it was from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, whatever. If I liked it, I liked it. So, um, you know, I'd listen to the Beatles, Rubber Soul, and go, yeah, man, that's rocking, and I'd listen to Michael Jackson, Dangerous was like the first CD I got. And
Hmm.
I loved that. And, I was always sort of on this journey to find, I could kind of tell it was like I hadn't got to where I needed to yet,
Yeah.
but I sort of knew what the elements were. Like I was like, I know John Bonham is sort of the closest thing I have to what I really love.
Yeah.
And then, you know, as I got into high school, I discovered bands like War. Do you know
Yep.
that band War? And their early stuff is so heavy. I mean, people don't think of it that way, but the drummer is really behind the beat and really ahead of his time as far as being quite down tuned. And a lot of what he's doing is really, to me, the elements of kind of what later would become doom music.
Really. Okay.
And so I suppose I was kind of playing in a kind of doomy style with no knowledge of that even being a genre. Like not,
Yeah.
didn't know about the Melvins or anything like that, but I certainly knew about, I would say like Pink Floyd too definitely had those moments of being, slow and
Sure.
behind the beat and
Yeah.
um, kind of, it's stoner music really when you think about it. Like
Yeah. I
it,
guess it's true.
yeah. So I don't have to go into a different mindset. I sort of just have to go back to being me because what I learned with Jace was I learned about, this thing called punk music, which as a kid, I just thought was all terrible. Like when I was a kid, that was things like Blink 182. And
Mm.
I just thought
Yeah.
this is like, I thought this is awful. Like I couldn't even, then when I would hear a band like the Sex Pistols or the Ramones or whatever, because it took me a long time to be able to get through to that music and see the
Sure.
value in it because I just found it kind of thin and
Sure. Yeah. If you
yeah. So
contextualize it in music history, when you kind of like see that the originators of punk, not Blink 182, but
yeah,
Sex Pistols and the Ramones
yeah,
and bands like that, and see kind of where they came from, which was, essentially the Ramones kind of came from like doo-wop and like, kind of that style of music, like the Shangri-Las and stuff like that. um it always ties into what came before it in some way or another. um yeah, but so then where how does Doom or where does Doom fall into your chronology, as far as this, like, being a 5-year-old kid getting turned on
yeah.
to music, being obsessed. um you're obviously listening to, like, a lot of pop music, stuff like Michael Jackson, some of the classic rock, Led Zeppelin, so forth. Where does it get heavy and doomy?
Yeah, so I think it's just it was naturally the way I played. And at around like 16 years old, I formed a band with some schoolmates. So I was already playing in a band and playing twice a week, but they were all older. I would say the influences of that band were all in the past. So it was, Donny Hathaway, and Zeppelin and Floyd, and but kind of equal parts, sort of like, I guess, kind of like R&B
Okay.
and like psychedelic stuff.
Interesting.
And I always felt within that band like I loved doing all of that, but there was an element to me that sort of wanted to get a bit more probably aggressive and just even bigger and heavier. And so for me that was maybe, I found it harder to find contemporary bands that did it for me as much as people like Hendrix and Floyd and that did. But they were there. So there were bands like Faith No More. I love that drummer, and I think he speaks a similar language to me, where it's very caveman, lots of heavy drumming on the toms, and
Okay.
But of course, in high school, like, we didn't have access to anything further underground, because if a band like the Melvins or the Dwarves or anything at that level below as far as popularity, if they came to Australia, like, we would never be able to see them anyway, because they would play in overage venues. And every now and then we'd get a little snippet, like I got to see Mr. Bungle play an all ages show. And
Oh, cool.
actually, no, I got to see them play an under 18s show, which was even like cooler in a way, because it was just a room full of kids just completely like
Freaking
had no
out.
idea what was going on. Like, there's a room full of kids that went to see the singer from Faith No More.
Oh, right. Okay.
And then, and what was even better, not to digress for too long, was the support act was Neil Hamburger.
Oh,
And
okay.
it was, again, a room full of kids going, what the heck? He just coughed for about half an hour. And
Wow.
but what happened is I then formed a band with some friends in high school, and we probably, and one of them is now playing part-time in Dead. And we just naturally, that again was drums and two basses, and we just naturally leaned towards slower playing. And we were hugely influenced by, we all loved that sort of early era King Crimson, where songs were more like just a bit of a basic structure from which to improvise. And and then somewhere along the line, people said, you guys sound like the Melvins. And we were like, who were they? And then we went and saw them. We saw them support Tool.
Okay.
And that was a life-changing moment. That was like, they're doing the thing that is sort of in our brain. Like, like they're actually executing it. It was the first time I'd seen, for me, like, that sort of the power of, like, a John Bonham or a Buddy Miles sort of drummer, combined with the finesse of like a Mitch Mitchell or Ginger Baker, that sort of more jazzy. I'd always thought, like, I don't know how you bring that together. And then I was watching someone do it in front of me.
Oh, wow.
And what really stood out was I was watching someone do it, and I was watching him just drop sticks constantly, and he didn't care. Like, he just didn't. He didn't. It was, this thing clicked in my brain. I was like, this is really heavy, because this guy is pushing himself to the point of failure constantly.
Right.
Which is, again, what we loved about bands like King Crimson. You listen to any of their earlier albums, you hear so many mistakes, because they're not trying to be perfect. They're trying to find what their limit is, and they keep finding it, and they leave it on the record. It's just like, oh, okay, sorry, I hit the snare mic. But but we don't have time to retake that 14-minute song. So there it is.
Right. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then some older people kind of said to me, hey, you really need to listen to, I remember Boris being, you know, sort of recommended. But yeah, like all music, the further, I would say the majority of what people kind of classify as doom, I just think sucks and is really boring. But
Yeah.
when you find the thing that you love, I'd say like the drummer from Corrupted, Japanese band who I was lucky enough to play with over there. Like to me, he gets it.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
doom and he plays slow, but he's musical. That's the difference. It's not just about how slow can I be.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's two versions of playing slow, right? And Kyle from Harvey Milk definitely gets this. There's the version where you are, and I know this is going to sound wanky, but it's real. There's the version where you are playing all of the silence, all of the bits in between.
Mm-hmm.
You are still playing them. Like you're just not hitting anything,
Right.
but you're feeling the moment, and you're
Sure.
keeping the pulse. And this might sound like a strange example, but I think Ringo Starr is an amazing example of that.
Okay. Yeah.
Often what's so musical about him is that he waits.
Right.
He's not helping himself out by playing a fill up until the one. He waits all the way until the one hits, and then he hits just that microsecond after, which
Mm-hmm.
gives you that feeling of like we're not in a hurry.
Yeah.
And then there's the heavy metal way of playing doom, and that's, to me, they're the people that don't get it. And what they do is they hit a note and then they wait a while and then they hit another one. And it doesn't have the kind of lumbering,
Because
quality to it.
it's not in time. Is that
I
the
think it's
problem?
sort of just, it's got this stiffness because they're probably landing, if you get technical about it, they're probably landing each beat sort of just, a little bit rushed. Even though they waited all that time to hit the next one,
Yeah.
they kind of
Okay. There's no
um
soul.
I don't like, there is no right or wrong. For someone else might hear a band like that and go, that's the best. And
Yeah.
an example in a way of a band that absolutely nail that is Con8. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but the band, which is like Stephen O'Malley from Sun and
Hmm. I
a
don't know
couple
if
of
I know
members
him.
from, they are, to me, like they are innovators. They found new ways to play slow, and particularly their older material, even though it's slow, it's got this aggressiveness.
Yeah.
Their later material is, I think they're a band that just, only got better with age. Their later material becomes more almost like, dare I say, jazzy, like
Sure.
but still really slow. And so there's no wrong or right. For me, they are a band that they don't have that sort of slow plodding kind of, version of doom where there's still a kind of groove.
Mm-hmm.
They have more of an aggression, but it's fantastic. It's almost terrifying at times.
Yeah.
And Swans are maybe a version of that too. Swans do a lot of
Oh,
stuff
okay.
that is slow and heavy,
Right.
but it does not have a groove as such, but it's fucking awesome. So
Yeah.
there's no wrong or right, but for me, my natural state is playing. I Yeah, I as a kid, I loved cannabis. I really did, and I think it shows like in the way I play.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you think of what drug does someone kind of like, what are they drawn to?
Yeah.
Some people are drawn to speed, and it shows in the way they play.
Yeah.
You
Sure. Well, see, I get stoned and I like to go to work. I like to like start doing stuff. I mean, I don't like
Yeah,
to sit still. I don't like to just sit there and just like
yeah,
that's not fun for me. So it's
yeah. And I can't do it anymore, by the way, but I still feel like I can. Yeah, like it's not a good thing for me to do.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
but yeah,
Well, so now the question is when and where did Harvey Milk come into your life?
yeah. Um, And you know, I I could not love this album more. By the way, like I re-listened to it in full um, just before doing this interview, and
Hmm.
the thing about Harvey Milk that stood out to me is I thought it's the younger you go, the easier it is to have, you know, a life-changing album. You know, like
Sure.
as a 7, 8 year old, Led Zeppelin 4 changed my life as it did so many people. You know, as a 9, 10 year old, Soundgarden Super Unknown changed my life, you know, because everything's new at that point, you know. So
Sure. Yeah.
Harvey Milk would be, you know, well into my late 20s. And I just think at that point, you've been playing it for so long that the longer life goes on, the harder it is to be truly like, you know, have a record really hit you in that way where you go,
Sure.
this has changed my world. So I know the album had already come out, and basically the band had, you know, had for all intents and purposes stopped playing. And various people had said to me probably for a few years, like, you must love Harvey Milk, but I didn't know who they were, and it was probably like pre-Bandcamp. It was, yeah. So it wasn't necessarily easy to access the music.
Sure.
So then by chance, I just bought this album on vinyl, um, and I didn't know like that it was their last album. So I started at the end, which is actually often how I like to do it when you can with a band. To like, you know,
Sure. Well,
starting with what's the most recent and sort of work my way back.
yeah, yeah. But then also
Yeah,
kind of coming in cold to a band like Harvey Milk and having this be the first record you heard.
yeah.
That's kind of wild too. I mean, so what was it about the record when you listened to it that was so compelling to you?
I can tell you that. So you know, bought it on vinyl, and that meant that in which is an advantage to an extent because it means when every time I put it on, you know, I had to be a little bit more present with it than you might with another format.
Sure.
Um, I reckon I put it on and went to sleep to it like probably every night for 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
Um,
Weird.
and my girlfriend at the time, who was relatively like we had just gotten together, I had no idea that that drove her mad. Like
I
because
bet.
I loved up until that point in my life going to bed to like I grew up listening to late night heavy metal shows on the radio, and so it's always comforted me to listen to loud music when I go to
Huh.
bed. But
Okay.
I actually had to stop doing it when I was in a relationship with her, and now I sort of can't get it back.
Yeah.
But I honestly, the first thing that really stood out to me was I thought, I do not understand how this vocalist, I don't understand how this works. Like, what is he,
Yeah.
how do you make that sound? And I just was struck by, I was like, the absolute, um, the backing of himself. I was like, how many people would have said to him, this is incorrect? Like, there's nothing about the way he's singing that sounds, it doesn't sound like anyone else. I can't place it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for a long time, I didn't even know if I liked it or not. The singing, I
Okay.
just knew that it just really, I was so hit by the power of it, And then eventually it
Yeah.
sort of clicked, and I thought, how could I ever have not loved this? This is so unique, and yeah, and then just the commitment to the music. So of course, if you then at the time I didn't know the other material, but if you then go back and listen to other songs, some of their songs are direct tributes to Kiss or Thin Lizzy, or
Right. Yeah.
you wouldn't suspect necessarily that they would then go on to make this album, but it is, to me, just, yeah, it is so committed to, no one plays anything out of place. No one adds anything that they shouldn't have, and no one holds
Yeah.
back more than they should. They so commit, like an orchestra. They just play.
It's pretty committed, isn't it? I mean, like, So this is the first time I've ever heard Harvey Milk as well.
Mm.
You suggest this record to me, and so I started listening to it. And the first problem is that I had to listen to it on YouTube, and no ads, oddly enough, and thankfully, but
Yeah.
no breaks. Like it's not a long record, and it's
Yeah.
only got 8 songs, correct?
I never
So
counted.
one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 7 songs.
I'm listening to you. I'm just going to grab my copy.
Yeah, please do because I have questions. Um, so 7 songs. It's only about it's under 40 minutes. So, that's 20 minutes aside, approximately, give or take. Um, and there's no breaks. Like almost like every song basically bleeds into the next. And whether it be because of the style of the music or what actual chords they ended up playing, it's really hard to tell where those breaks come in. Like where the
Yes.
song ended and the new one is beginning. Um, so that was very hard for me to digest and to figure out because, obviously if you've heard me do this show, you know that I go track by track and try to like, ask a question per song. The other problem was just like, what the fuck is this? Okay, the first song has no title. It's just an asterisk.
Yeah.
And every song after that is I something. I just want to go home. I am sick of all this too. I know this is no place for you. I alone got up and
Yeah.
left. I know this is all my fault. I did not call out. I'm like, okay, this is going to be a very personal conversation to have.
Yeah.
Um, and then let's say, okay, well, what is he even singing? So
Mm.
I had no record, no good until I mean, I could find it online eventually, but upon listening to it at first, I'm just like, I have no idea what's happening in these vocals. I don't know what he's singing about. I mean, I know it sounds very strained. I know he sounds like a wounded animal, but what is this? What's happening here? So this was a lot, you
Yeah.
know? And then lack of information. So I'm doing research, and I was just like, okay, nobody's saying anything about this album. No one's mentioning anything about these songs, you know. The only thing I was able to find was that Creston Spears has said that the album was the only Harvey Milk album written as one piece,
Mm.
and also went into further detail saying it is essentially a rock opera. And then I found out that it was based on the very first record, the first song off the first record,
Yes.
um, which was the song called "A Small Turn for Human Kindness," correct?
Yeah. It might be called like small. I'll grab it in a sec, but it's almost the exact same name.
Okay,
But maybe there's like an extra letter or something like small
okay,
turns or I'll grab it in a moment. I've got the album.
okay,
Yeah. I actually get, stumped because this album means so much to me.
yeah,
But one thing that really stood out, we were really lucky enough to do a tour with the band Black Cobra,
okay,
amazing band out of San Francisco. And again, I think a good example of a band that are kind of misunderstood. Like yes, they just sound like they're a two-piece, like just metal band, but the drummer is so unconventional that, I know it's such a cliche, but he brings a sort of jazzy element to it, even
sure,
though he's pounding the crap out of it. And I once read an interview with um, Jason, the guitarist, and he described this album as one of his, I think it was your top five or something.
okay.
And he described them as a rock band. And I went, you know what? That is the strangest thing that that's actually what they are. And that
Sure.
sounds so like middle of the road.
I mean,
But
if you think about all of their songs, I mean, like, because I listened to some of the other records just to kind of like get an idea. I
yeah,
mean, and like the Pleaser is a straight up rock record. And
yes,
other albums that they have elements like not all of their albums sound like this, you know.
no,
They definitely pay tribute to a lot of their original influences, which are essentially Kiss, Led Zeppelin, and like Thin Lizzy or something.
Yeah.
And that's what they
And
do. They can do it.
there is an element of that that still makes it into this album amazingly. So that sort of, Kiss, Thin Lizzy, um, so the reason I have some information, perhaps that you don't, is just because I've been able to speak to some of the members a bit.
Sure.
In the
Yeah.
sense that I've worked with Creston. Creston has played on a couple of our records, and Kyle, the drummer and recording engineer of this album, he has mixed and mastered some of our albums.
Okay.
But he also plays drums for Kurt Vile, who tours Australia quite regularly.
Oh, okay.
So we've managed to catch up a few times, and I have to see if I can find a copy. It did get published somewhere, but I interviewed Kyle a few years back, and I initially didn't want to ask him too much about Harvey Milk because I didn't want to be that guy that,
Because he was on
talks
tour
about
with
the
Kurt
past.
Vile.
Yeah, but he just said, man, just ask me anything, because no one actually ever cared about us when we were a band. So there's very
Right.
little, we didn't ever get, nothing is out there.
Right.
But one thing we talked about the Pleaser, and he explained to me how essentially each song is a tribute to a band, and it's very obvious. So one song is their version of Black Dog, the Zeppelin song,
Oh, yeah. Very evident.
and yeah, and one song is the Kiss song, and funnily enough, Kyle's not a Kiss fan. He was like, oh, that's that to me
Sure.
I never quite understood. But all I'm getting at is there is an element that, and this is Creston absolutely that brings it. There is an element of Harvey Milk that, for me, better than any other band I can think of, captures the feeling of being a kid with the door closed and the stereo cranked and a tennis racket in your hand, and Creston is amazing at that. He plays guitar solos and lead breaks that just bring the joy of AC/DC and Thin Lizzy and those bands that sort of really you know played lead guitar parts that were, yes, they required a lot of proficiency, but they also were very musical and kind of catchy and made you
Sure.
feel something. And he's still, in this album, as bleak and intense and heavy as it is, he still manages to get in a few of those moments
Yeah.
where you,
Well,
where you go,
you know what I think it is, oddly. I don't know if you've
mm,
thought about this. I don't know if you've tried it. I didn't try it, but I was thinking about it. I was just like, and if I just like played this in double time and fast forwarded it, it would probably sound a lot like a typical composition, like pop song. Because, like I said, this album is not very long for as slow as it is and for as few
mm,
songs as are on it. So essentially, I think what happens is that each track is ostensibly like one or maybe two riffs, like your typical pop format. You have a verse and a chorus, maybe another verse and chorus, and that's like the very bare bones of a song. So I think
mm,
that's what these songs are. They're basically like a verse and a chorus, but they're so elongated that they take up all this space and they take up all this room. But if you were to shrink it down and just kind of play them faster, let's just say, like you would hear the progressions easier, you
yeah,
know? Like they wouldn't sound so dissonant because this chord like butt up next to this chord makes sense in your brain when you hear them. But when you put that space between them, you're like, how did we get here? You know?
yeah,
It's really weird. And without the breaks, I was just like, I don't even know when the song ended. So it's just like, so I was like, wait, is this that next song? And I'd have to check the time just to see if it was the next song or not.
yeah.
I was just like, oh god damn it. It's just like this is another song. So weird.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, I love that you keep, you noting that it's actually not that long. And what they achieved with that is that it is a intense listen if you pay attention and you
Hmm.
feel like you went somewhere. You feel different, after it's over. But it is not ever, nothing goes for longer than it needed to. So they're not trying to punish you, or like if you listen to really maybe the first two Harvey Milk albums,
Hmm.
they use a technique that my band in high school did a lot as well. And it's pretty common, I think, when you're starting out and you want to kind of feel intense, is some of their songs, they just punish you for minutes on end.
Yeah.
And the idea is that then there's a reward, as a reward for for having sat through it. And that's something that is usually more, well, it connects with you more if you've watched a band do that live,
Hmm. Sure.
but it's harder to translate on an album as being, it doesn't necessarily engage you the whole time. You sort of sometimes become aware that, yeah, I'm basically just earning my right to that beautiful riff at the end.
Sure.
On this album, years later, they have none of that, and
Hmm.
every moment has a reason why it's there. And I can only imagine there's a lot of stuff that got edited out, like
Yeah.
when Creston was writing it.
Okay.
And yeah, it doesn't, like, it's a common, and like mentioned Corrupted before, they've got some albums that are just 1 70-minute piece or something, and
Mm.
they're great. And they're great for different reasons, but they take a long time to kind of come in, and they take a long time to ease out. Whereas with this, you feel, once you know the album, which I do, it's actually incredibly, like, uh you realize every bar.
Sure. Yeah.
There's none that take you by surprise, or that you don't think, oh, I thought this one went for a few more. Or, no, it actually just, it's very, very well written. As you said, it just happens to be slow. It's just
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's not a lot of
using tempo.
parts. There's not a
Yeah,
lot of parts to count, really. If you really want to sit there and count out the parts, I mean, it's just like I'm saying, I didn't do it, but I guarantee you each of these songs has maybe two major like motions
yeah,
at most. So,
yeah. I'd have to, yeah,
yeah, I
listen
mean,
and
I'll have
check.
to sit with it again and do it and maybe kind of like do the math to it, but it's such a strange record. Um, Now, so normally I would ask questions about each song. I only have two questions based on these songs. But
Yeah,
before I get there, maybe considering the lack of information about this album and maybe even about the band, considering you have a personal history with them, I mean, what can you share that you know about this album?
yeah. Well, I can tell you that. So Kyle, um, the drummer, Kyle Spence, was involved with the band from the very beginning,
Hmm.
but he's not the drummer on all the albums. So The
Right.
Pleaser is the first album that he played on, which
Oh,
was
okay.
basically the third Harvey Milk album in their kind of first, you know, um, uh, life, and then
Right,
they
right.
stopped for a
Because
while.
yeah, they broke up for a few years.
Yeah, and then they did an album called Special Wishes, which is amazing. But that's actually the original drummer again on drums,
Hmm.
but Kyle mixed it. And so Kyle was involved at an engineer level, sort of, I think, from the maybe the very beginning, or certainly early on.
Okay.
And then, after Special Wishes came out, he rejoined the band on drums, and then they did Life, the Best Game in Town, which was a really difficult album for me not to put on the list, because like Joe Preston plays on that, and he's
Yeah.
one of my favorite people and musicians ever. Um, but I sort of had to be true to the idea of the podcast.
Sure.
But what I can tell you is that Kyle was always involved as an engineer, but um, Life the Best Game in Town, I'm pretty sure was the first time that he was, you know, playing, recording, and mixing, from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And then with this album, he also recorded it at his home studio. And really surprising to me was the fact that they, at this point, when they made this album, Steve Tanner, the bass player, was living in New York. So they would fly him down and kind of learn the parts and then sort of record them like the next day,
Hmm.
which
Okay.
I just really struggled to get my head around, because I was like, this album sounds like a band played it like relentlessly for 6 months and then, went and recorded it. Because,
Yeah.
it's the sort of music where you can't fudge it. Like, you have to know every little count.
Right. Well, so
Um,
did they track this or did they record it live?
so I think they recorded the beds very live.
Okay.
But then, then there's two guitars on a lot of it. There's
They did
Kyle plays like
overdubs. Right.
there's like a sort of synth that, or maybe it's not a Hammond organ, I don't think. I think it's a synthesizer.
Yeah.
It's actually in a lot more of the album than you realize. Like, once you start to, it's really well, like, mixed in, so that it's just giving everything more,
Oh,
girth.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
And the vocals, yeah, I'm sure were done as overdubs, because what I also can tell you is that, Creston is in the room with his guitar amp. It's got that sound of someone using, feedback in a musical way rather than just doing it as an overdub.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and it just, I think it's a real feat of engineering. It's not the way that they recorded it. It serves the music so well. It doesn't get in the way. It doesn't try to be. I think it's really tempting when people make albums with big room sounds like that,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of go, maybe go a little too far, and then it just starts to sound like mush.
Sure.
Yeah, and they are just playing. They are playing to the sound of the room. Like, that's what I really hear.
Yeah.
So the sort of decay on Kyle's bass drum hits and stuff. It's like it's part of the timing, of the music.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what else I can also tell you that I remember Kyle saying it was the first time he really fully understood, in order to capture Creston's voice properly, he just had to get the microphone a long way away from him, which is counterintuitive to 99% of other vocalists, where
Sure. Yeah.
usually when you record, if the singer backs off more than a foot or something, you'll usually, the engineer will say, yeah, just step closer, like, we're not really capturing you.
Sure.
But because Creston is so, just got this enormous voice,
Yeah.
he actually realized, I've got to treat this differently. And so for most of it, he's a long way back from the
Yeah. Well, because he's
microphone.
like shouting and howling. I mean, you kind
Yeah.
of, I don't think you want that up on the mic because it'll just distort, you know? So if you're gonna
Yes.
scream, you want to scream from back here, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I'm not, I can't scream anyway. I mean, if I back off a foot from the mic, you're just not gonna hear me at all, even if I am yelling. Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, I imagine he has a booming voice because it's absolutely present in this recording. And if he was recording that far off the mic, I mean, yeah, it has to be loud.
Yes. Absolutely. I think
That's
another
cool.
thing worth mentioning here, I mean, this isn't a secret or anything, like, but it might not have come up in your research. I mean, Creston, he studied music, at a sort of,
Composition. Yeah,
Yeah,
classically trained, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's immediately a major difference between, there are several heavy bands out there that love Harvey Milk, and I'm in one of them, and we're all sort of at times trying to kind of get a bit of that same magic, but most of us don't have that understanding of classical composition that Creston does. And I
Yeah.
think that can't be underestimated. Like, you listen to some of those guitar parts in this album. I think the average engineer would say, do you need to redo that? Like, did you just hit the wrong note? Because they are
Sure.
not they are not the obvious notes. To be
Yeah.
hitting. I don't understand. I'm a drummer. I don't understand what sort of harmonies they are, what chords he's hitting, but they sound wrong. Like in a beautiful
Yeah.
way.
They're like diminished or like dissonant chords. I love that actually. I kind of I dabble in guitar and that's kind of how I write. I don't know. I'm not classically trained at all, but I know that like certain notes will make a chord, but it'll make a dissonant chord, and those are the ones I gravitate towards because they do kind of sound off. They do kind of sound a little weird and like kind of like out of tune, but I know that like when I hit it right and I know when I play it back, I was just like that makes a lot of sense. Like it sounds right with everything kind of together, but if you kind of isolate it or if you fuck up and you like maybe play the wrong note or accidentally mute one of the strings as you're trying to strum or finger pick the chord, it doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Like it kind of has to be exact.
Yeah, and it needs that. Yeah, you need to back. I will probably keep saying that same thing, but you need to back yourself. I have a friend, Ben Salter, that he wrote a song called that, Back Yourself. And I keep thinking of it because I think that's exactly
Mhm.
what playing music like this is. You have to give it everything, because most people are going to hate it.
Mhm.
Most people are not going to speak the language that Harvey Milk is speaking through this music. So
Sure.
their assumption is going to be, this is wrong. So you just have to hit it 100%.
Hmm.
Another thing, sorry, did we even answer the question that you asked? What
I didn't
was
ask the questions.
I haven't
Uh
asked. Okay, let's go there. Let's go to
well
the question, and then we'll see. Yeah.
okay, so based on the songs, um I already read the titles of these songs for you and for everybody listening that might not
Yeah.
know them. Um Oddly enough, I think all these song titles could be referenced to touring.
Oh yeah.
You have the album in front of you, don't you?
Yeah, and I'm looking at the lyrics right now. Yeah.
So which of these song titles do you think best suits your mental state on tour?
um yeah, that's an interesting, because I can see the lyrics, so I never made that. I've never felt like I just want to go home
Really?
if I'm on tour.
Really? Okay.
No.
That's interesting.
Um, I have definitely felt like I'm sick of all this too. Like we are in agreement that this is punishing.
Sure.
Um, and I don't think I felt like, you know I know this is all my fault. Um, like, I try not to beat myself up, even if you
Well,
know.
you always have
Um,
Jace to fall back on. I mean, you guys are kind of doing everything together.
yeah, and we really do back each other up. I have to say, like, I've never felt, yeah, like I've there's been moments in the band where I felt like I'm amazed that he's followed me, because I do the booking and stuff. So there's been times where I go, this has been 2 or 3 nights in a row that were horrible, as far as where we've played and how they've treated us. And
Right.
you know, I'm amazed that he's not saying anything. He's not saying,
There's only so much
dude.
you can do when you're there. I mean, you're how many hundreds of
Yeah,
miles, if not thousands of miles from home? I mean, like what can you do?
yeah. Um, but funnily enough, I did not call out um, is probably one that is relevant at times, where um, yeah, because we're not a band that sort of, fit in the sort of hardcore scene, or, I guess scenes where there's more likely for people to get a bit rough in the crowd.
Hmm.
But we did have, an experience on one tour where we were playing a festival, and it was an amazing show for us, and we had a great time, and the people that were there loved it. But we didn't know until afterwards that, you know, there was actually someone being a real dickhead and like groping people and, like making them really uncomfortable. And a friend of ours
What
actually
was
sort of
this?
dealt with.
What was this?
What was that?
Woodstock '99?
Yeah, no, it was Total Fest, which is an amazing festival, and I feel bad that that's where it happened, because the people that run it would also felt awful.
Hmm.
Um, but that was a strange feeling for us, because it felt like, this isn't something we've ever really had to deal with, and we don't relate to the idea that anyone would give a fuck what we had to say, because most of our experience playing music has been that the majority of the crowd, are hostile or wish we weren't there, or so it took us a while to get our heads around the idea that actually in Dead, sometimes we do play to a room full of people who are listening to us, who are,
Hmm.
um, we really had to switch our mode from, head down to sort of looking people in the eye.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did not call out, just on what you said is maybe yeah, it's not been something we've ever been good at, and we don't respond well to, if I'm at a show and someone in the band starts telling people what to do, like, form a circle pit or step forward or whatever, I'm like, you know what, I'm fucking out. I didn't come here for a lecture. Like, I
Right.
just want to see you rock out.
Hmm.
But if it's a case of people doing shit things, then I think, yeah, now that I'm now admitting at 38, okay, I'm actually an adult now. So, you know, it's worth being you know, worth considering what are the young people, what are they seeing,
Right. Sure.
behavior wise.
You
Yeah.
got to take responsibility too for some things. I mean, I think that, what you're describing at this festival was out of your control. And I think that if you knew what was happening at the time it was happening, that'd be a very different story than what you're saying now. There's only so much you can really do, but that is a powerful place to be when you have something to say. So if you can, then great. But if you can't, because a lot of that stuff outside, in the audience and stuff, it's an unknown to people on a stage.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it probably just got us thinking a bit more about being, often in our promo, like our photos or whatever, we've been essentially taking the piss out of, you know, um, macho-ness, or, tough guys, or,
Hmm.
and I think it just got us thinking a bit more about, like, okay, we might need to be a bit more deliberately overt about that. We might, it might just be worth letting people know at the start of the show, and not in that lecturing way, but letting people know that we want people to be safe. We want people to have a good time. Because
Sure.
some bands really thrive. Some metal bands thrive on, fuck shit up, and, like,
Right.
and that's not us. We actually just want everyone to have a good time
Hmm.
and to go home feeling good. So it probably just got us thinking a bit more about how do we make that stuff clear? How do we make it clear to, I guess, all kind of, vulnerable or minority sort of status people, that, we want to be an ally, even if we don't look like we, you know, fit into your particular, sort of, scene.
Right.
But that's important to us. So yeah.
Sure. Um, so the only other question I have for you pertaining to the songs was for I know this is all my fault.
Yeah.
Um, so you have been operating as a record label for many years now with your partner Jace. Has there ever been a moment where you had to admit your fault to your partner, that you had to take responsibility for a failure in the record label?
Oh, in the record label. So I thought you were talking about, intimate partners.
No. Your partner
Um,
Jace.
yeah, okay. Yeah, but in the same way, I think we always own them because we understand that, if it's a dead release, um, essentially we're both responsible, like in the sense that it's we don't tend to say, oh, okay, you took care of that, therefore that's your, fault that that didn't go right.
Right.
But one that I can think of, this is the only one that's jumping out at me. When we released our second album, uh, that was in conjunction with a tour that we booked in Australia for Vaz, one of our absolute favorite bands.
Okay.
And the LPs were ready just in time. Like, so, I remember seeing a photo on my memories the other day, literally us on the floor of the Tote, the venue in Melbourne, before the doors open, like stuffing records into sleeves. And as we were stuffing them in, I think Jace's wife at the time, Lou, I think she pointed out, she said, there's no song names anywhere. Like, what are the songs called? And we realized, oh, we haven't put the song names anywhere on the artwork. And I think it was about 5 seconds of, is that important? Like, are we worried about that? And we're like, no, it's fine. And again, it's because it's like we're in the digital age. Like, you can find it out really, like,
Right.
really easily. So,
Yeah.
but I do remember feeling a bit like, oops. But again, it's just not, those things aren't, and I think Jace has been a really good influence on me with those things. They're not worth losing sleep over, like,
Sure.
yeah, we're doing our best. And yeah, but I don't think there's ever been like a really big fuck up. Like, I've certainly never sent like the wrong master, or
Sure.
anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big fuck up. I mean, that's a pretty good one, I think. I mean, I mean, things happen, but I mean, because you're a partnership too, because it's the two of you. I mean, and I mean, am I wrong about that? Chase is your label partner as well as your band partner, correct?
Yeah, it's a bit of a sort of like Trey Parker and Matt Stone thing. So, I mean, I started the label before I met Jace, and part of the reason it was called We Empty Rooms was the idea, in a way, was, younger, probably more hippie-ish, Jem. I saw it as like, hey, everyone can get involved, and I've got friends that make music, and if they want to, release something, they can be a part of it.
Hmm.
But I very quickly learned most people just don't want to do that work. So it basically very quickly became clear, like, the label part of it is really just me.
Oh, okay.
But then I'd never underestimate, as an example, like those 7 inches. I screen printed them all, but Jace folded the majority of them. So, and again, because most of the releases are dead releases now, the artwork starts with him. Like, I just say to him, can you draw me something that's square? Can you draw me something that fits in a rectangle? Can you, these are
Right.
the things I need, and then I'll put them together,
Hmm.
or again, for the 7 inches, I said, it's going to be 9 7 inches. Can you come and mix the colors? Because even though I'm a screen printer, I'm terrible with color. Whereas he's got a degree in art, and
Oh,
so
okay.
I was like, can you make the colors so that they look good together? Because
Right.
if I do them, it'll just be this kind of vomit mess of, whatever I felt like at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely both of us, but the majority of the label grunt work is myself. It's just a matter of focusing on our strengths. Jace writes 90% of the music, in the sense that just about every song starts with him, and kind of, I get involved, but
Hmm.
it wouldn't have happened in the first place if it wasn't for him. And if it was me writing the music, we'd probably be good for an album every 3 or 4 years rather than 2 or 3 albums in a year. So
Right. Okay.
yeah,
So now we talked briefly about working with Creston Spears or Spires, is it his name?
yeah, I think it's Spires.
Spires,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Uh, so you have a working relationship with him. You've put out two of his records so far, one under his name, which was 2018, I think, right? And
yeah,
then
around then. Yeah.
well, I think that's what the title is, right? Because it's the
Oh
Roman
yeah,
numerals.
yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Um, and then the last one being Brown Dwarf.
yeah.
So, I mean, do you have any plans with him for possibly releasing a third?
I think so. I only say that because, I mean, so just to go back a second, as far as, I guess, if you know, the theme of the show is how did it change your life?
Hmm.
Um, I would never, when I first heard it, have thought, oh, okay, I'll work with these people in the future. But, I started to see that, oh, okay, Kyle is a recording engineer, and so I started working with him. We've never done a recording with him, but I would like to one day. But I learned very quickly that one of his strengths is working, I guess, under difficult circumstances, like because of the nature of um, the sort of bands that he's worked with and that he's been in. They often have to record in shitty spaces where the equipment's not very good, and it's hard to make that stuff sound good. And I realized that's what he's good at.
Hmm.
Well, that's
Okay.
one thing that he's good at. Um, and also that he was just very, very pleasant to work with. Like he listened to my suggestions, and we seemed to understand each other. And so that meant along the way uh, that that we have a song called Commander, which is on a Learning Curve Records compilation, and Kyle mixed it, and I knew that he played, that he could play piano and stuff. And I said, can you play just in this section? Um, and because it's very straightforward, and I know that you can play and you have a piano, so the
Sure.
easiest way to do this will be to get you to do it.
Hmm.
And he sent me the mix back, and he said, Creston was hanging out, and it was easier to get him to play than me because that way I could press the button and he could just play it.
Yeah.
So he
Okay.
so he sort of said, I hope that's okay. Creston played instead of me. I just was like, I felt that excitement that you feel as a little kid. I was like,
Yeah, I
I
bet.
felt like this, yeah, like this sort of gift that you can't have, in the way that a hoodie means everything to you because it's your girlfriend's, and you put it on and you feel stronger, and you feel, yeah, like you're carrying
Yeah.
the love. I
Right.
felt like
Right.
that. I just felt like I felt like this is so beautiful that someone who, or two people who've meant so much to me, have just, you know, been involved in something we've done.
Yeah, that's great.
Um, so then when we were putting together Raving Drooling, the album, I wrote to Creston and said, can you play a guitar solo on this piece?
Hmm.
And that was a really, really, again, challenging, like a really cool experience, because I'm writing to someone who I just think is, musically, again, I mean, genius is kind of a weird thing to throw around, but just more importantly, his music has meant so much to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what he said to me was, I'd love to do it, but you need to instruct me. The more you can instruct me, the better the result will be.
Hmm.
And that was really, really intimidating, because I thought, that's insane. Like that's like
Right.
Michael Jordan saying to me, I'm going to need you to coach me a little bit here, in
Right.
this, basketball game. I'd be like, what are you talking about? Just just do your thing.
Just do, yeah, do
But I
what you
thought
do.
about it. Yeah, I thought about it, and I thought, no, I understand what he means, because this isn't his band, and he doesn't
Not,
know the album, and
it's
he
not his
doesn't have,
music. Yeah.
yeah. And I thought about people that I'd worked with in the past that had been really good leaders. I've done very little playing on other people's records, but when I have, it's been obvious who's good at, directing someone and who isn't.
Hmm.
So I wrote it down and I said, I want you to play one of those solos that you do where it sounds like everything's about to fall apart, and it's just, you think like this can't possibly come together, but then all of a sudden there it is, and your fist is in the air, and it's the best feeling ever. And he had a really big laugh and was like, yeah, I think I can do that. And he did it, and it was great. And I just felt really good that he was, playing music, because he seemed to have had a break. And
Right.
then I became a member of his Patreon. When he fired up the Patreon, he was really prolific at the time. He was putting out a lot of stuff, and he wrote it down and he said, like, I kind of want you to think of this as in the old days where you would go to, the local blacksmith for your blacksmith requirements, or
Hmm.
the bootmaker to make your boots. And because you knew that that's their talent, that's what they've invested their time into, and that's what they know how to do.
Sure.
And he said, please think of me as, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, please think of me as the same. If you want to, support it, then I can go ahead and make the music, and then share it with you.
Hmm.
And I just thought that was really beautiful and a really great way to think about it. And it is actually the same approach I took with the Bandcamp subscription for Dead, which
Yeah.
has been really, really important for us. But I said the same thing. I was like, look, I don't want to do a thing where, hey, pay $10 a month and we'll send you a, personalized whatever. I was like, no, we're already making music. We're making a lot of it. And if you like it and want it to happen more, this
Right.
is a way that you can support it. And essentially you'll just be supporting us to do what we do, how we do it. We won't be personalized messages or, like, I don't like that stuff. I
Hmm.
mean, I write notes to people to say, hey, thanks for buying the record and that, but I don't like the idea of, I don't want you to pay me to like do a greeting, or something. It's like that shit. Anyway,
Right.
so I followed his Patreon and I was like, I'm loving hearing these songs, and yes, they're very raw, and he's clearly not a sound engineer in the way that Kyle is, but I resonate with that enthusiasm he had, where it's just like, I just got to get this out, like, here's a song.
Right.
And then I said to him at some point, I wrote to him and said, I'd like to help with, releasing some of this, And the thing that I struggled with a bit is I just thought there has to be someone bigger and better than me. Like, there has to be. This is crazy. Like
Like a label, you mean?
a record label, yeah,
Yeah.
someone with some, and it was a really hard, it was indicative in a way of the times. I thought, like, again, part of the reason Harvey Milk stopped making records is because Hydra Head, the label at the time, stopped
Hmm.
existing,
Right.
or pretty much stopped. I think Hydra Head as a label, I don't think it stopped because they didn't want to do it anymore. I just think it stopped because it was increasingly, not viable. If you
Right.
look at the bands that they've supported, they haven't gone for the money makers.
Right.
So yeah, we talked back and forth for a while, and in the end, I was like, well, I can do it, but I can't, like, it won't make you lots and lots of money, or um, but yeah, to his credit, he just said, let's do it, and he also said, this Patreon thing is it's the best. It's the only time he'd ever seen an income from music.
Right.
You know, he
Hmm.
said, you're talking to me about Harvey Milk like they were some big thing, but we never got paid. Like,
Right.
um, so he just saw it as a bonus. Anyway, so we did it, and it sold well, not amazingly, but it sold out. And then
It's all
said,
that
let's do it
matters.
again. Yeah,
Yeah.
I said, let's do it again, and we did it again, and then yeah, it's sort of been paused a little bit because of really because of initially because of COVID. Um, and I would like to pick it up again, but at the same time, what I would really prefer for Creston is that someone else grabbed it, because that would expose his music to more people again. Like
Right. Yeah.
So I'll sort of try, maybe when I'm over in the States later this year, I'll see if I can find someone that wants to push it more.
Hmm.
A label, like I should mention, label in the US called Vantage USA, one of my favorite labels ever, and turned me on to a lot of great bands. And we've been really like honored to, they put out our first album, and they released Raving Drooling as well. They co-released the Brown Dwarf one. But that's when I say they, that's another one-man operation, pretty much like me.
Yeah.
That doesn't have. It's not like when he releases something, it's going out to thousands, but
Right.
it's
But
still,
between
still
the two of
connecting.
you, the Vantage is covering the US and you're covering Australia.
Yeah, and I think in this day and age, that grassroots thing in some ways has more value than ever. In the sense that, yeah, we might not be reaching big numbers, but we are connecting very deliberately.
Right.
In this day and age, no one's buying. It's not like when I was a kid and you could buy most of the Ministry albums for $4. So you just bought
Right.
them anyway. And for me, I went, oh, they're great. But other people went, no, it's okay. I think
Yeah.
if you've bought one of these records, it's because you're investing in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, because you mentioned it, you are actually going on tour and you will be in the US. What
Yeah.
do those dates look like?
They're still coming together, but basically we hit the Caterwall Festival, another Conan, initiative.
Yep. And that's
Um,
in May, right?
yeah, that's the last weekend in May. And we'll start there, and then we will go across to the Pacific Northwest. And we have a kind of unusual situation where we have a lot of good support and followers in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, which
Hmm.
is my understanding traditionally three states that a lot of bands kind of gloss over.
Right.
But we really love it. And yeah, so we'll play in a bunch of towns in those states, and then we'll do a few shows around Portland, Seattle area with Thrones,
Okay.
which I'm really excited about. And then not sure yet, so I don't want to jinx anything. We're not sure what happens after that. We might just finish up and go, let's go home, or if we can put together enough shows, we'll kind of go down the West Coast as well. It's a funny time. I really, for the first time ever, suffered a fair bit of burnout from organizing.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Sure.
still I want to play as many shows as possible, but I don't want to give myself a breakdown
Right. Yeah.
from
Yeah.
organizing too much. Yeah.
I hear that, man. No, that's fine. I get it. I think you're taking on a lot. I mean, you're running a label, you're working in a band. That takes a lot. That takes a lot. And so if you're doing all the booking on top of that too, and then you actually have to go and do it, that's yeah, it's a lot, man.
Yeah, and I also, in the pandemic, I ended up getting like adult jobs, which use up more of my brain.
Oh, that's just
So
that's another killer right there.
it really is, yeah. Yeah, and
Right.
I realize now why up until then I just worked, kind of menial jobs, because you can still think about music while you're, folding t-shirts or
Right. Yeah.
delivering stuff for people or whatever. But yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
No,
that's where
I
that's
hear
at.
you. Okay. Well, that sounds great. Yeah, this has been great speaking with you. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Thank you
No,
for
thank you.
recommending Harvey Milk. Now I know about them more, and I will be looking into them further because I have not listened to everything yet, but I will get into it and explore it further.
Yeah, well, I really hope that, yeah, if this, if this podcast turns a few more people onto that album, I'll be very happy. And if anyone wants to talk to me about it, I'm happy to. Because yeah. Even though we've just spoken for ages, I feel like, yeah, there's so much more I could say about why it's so great. But in the same way, I think it's just good just to listen and discover it for yourself.
Yeah,
If you talk something up too much, it can, yeah,
sure, sure. And plus, it's just probably discombobulating. I mean, like to hear us talk about a small turn of human kindness as briefly as we did, really, um, it might not make sense to anybody unless they know the record.
yeah,
Because it's a strange one.
it
It
is.
takes a lot. You need to sit with it and like really parse it out. You know, so it was a challenging one, but I appreciate the challenge. Well, best of luck to you, man. Good luck with the record sales. Good luck with the tour and the international travel.
Excellent. Thank you.